Thank you guys all for attending. Um, First of all, this is about artificial intelligence, how we can use it to solve problems. But I want this to be more of a conversation than just a speech. I'm going to share some ideas from being in the space for a long time, share some of the things that we're doing. I'm also going to share some of the biggest things that we see in the industry around some expectations we have of some of the changes that we're going to undergo in society. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself as well, where my credibility comes from and so forth. And then for the second half of the conversation, I want it to actually be a conversation. So I'd love for you guys to ask questions. I'd love to hear your perspectives as well, because I think that's just a lot more interesting. So who I am, I was born in a tiny village with no running water and no electricity out in the southeastern desert of Iran. And I was really fortunate because the government of Iran wanted to execute my whole family. So as a result, we escaped to the country and became refugees. We lived in a refugee camp for a couple of years in Turkey before coming to the United States. I came to the United States when I was about 6 after being a refugee. And by the time I was 16, I got recruited by NASA at Goddard Space Flight Center to work on the Constellation X project, which I had written some white papers about black holes and how we can actually get more information about them. Because remember, at the time in the late 90s, black holes were mathematical constructs. We had proven mathematically that they probably exist, but we had no evidence for them. So I worked on at NASA for a couple of years, and then worked on the Mars Rover project before starting my first company in college, and then selling my second company in my 20s. And then I worked as an executive at a series of technology companies that had exits. Now I run Ahura AI. It's a technology company that enables people to learn 3 to 5 times faster than traditional education by collecting over 10,000 biometric data points every second, and then using artificial intelligence to identify the
So,
optimal way to deliver information to an individual.
so is
So
this
that's
like
just,
the Matrix scene where like you just hook you hook up the thing to your brain and it injects it into you? That's what I heard.
yeah, slightly slower, but that's the idea, right? Um, now I know Kung Fu, right? But it is slightly slower. You still have to spend time and effort learning the material, but because we personalize it to your needs in that moment, it enables people to learn significantly faster, and they're able to retain that information longer. So all the studies that we did at Harvard, students were learning 3 to 5 times faster. So of course, if you extrapolate that, you're talking about kids going to school from first grade to 12th grade, being able to take all that knowledge and learn it in 4 years. And then the 4 years of college being able to learn that in 1 year. So you're talking about fifth graders graduating from elementary school with the same knowledge base as someone that just graduated from a 4-year university. Now,
I'm in.
COVID has changed our business model somewhat, because we knew that there was going to be a massive impact because of the fourth industrial revolution. But with COVID now, we've seen 5 things. There's 5 big things that I want to chat with you guys about today, as far as what we expect to see, both from my perspective, a lot of the advisors I talk to, as well as a lot of the other people in the artificial intelligence community, and a lot of research that's being done, a lot of thought that goes into it. So there's 5 big things that we see are going to have a big impact. Number 1, there's massive job loss and mass unemployment. Number 2, acceleration of the fourth industrial revolution. The third is a long-term normalization of working from home and processes and systems that enable that moving forward. Much higher degree of government oversight. And then number 5 is data collection and data security and the importance of that in the post-COVID world. So I want to talk about each of these individually, and then I'm going to pause because I'd love to get your questions as we talk about these. So as you guys probably already know, if you've been following everything, we've had over 30 million new unemployment cases, unemployment claims in the USA over the past 6 weeks. We're talking about numbers. I mean, the official numbers haven't come out yet. They're supposed to come out in early May, but we're looking at potentially 20% unemployment rate in the United States. To put that in perspective, in 2008, in that recession, we had a 10% unemployment rate and the global economy collapsed. In the Great Depression, we had a 25% unemployment rate, and we got out of that through a world war. So just keeping in mind the level of problems that we're facing with the post-COVID world. According to the United Nations, over half of global jobs are at risk, over 50%. And educational institutions are struggling. They can't handle their own students, much less retraining and reskilling such a substantial portion of the global population. Look, I've been speaking with quite a few universities who've reached out to us and said, look, we're struggling to make sure the kids learn all the things that they need to, both in elementary, middle, and high school, but especially in universities. I'm working with some of the largest universities in Saudi Arabia, across Europe, across the United States, and they're struggling because traditional MOOCs don't work, right? Traditional learning from home on a computer only has a 16% completion rate, which means 84% of the people that try to learn an entire class from home quit before the class is over and are not able to complete it. So how do we retrain all these people? How do we retrain half of the global population for new jobs, given that the economy is changing so ridiculously rapidly? Because our infrastructure is not ready for it right now. So that's one of the biggest questions that we're going to have to deal with if we're going to rebuild the economy and get people back to work, especially all these people who've lost their jobs that won't easily be able to find new jobs to take their place. The second biggest issue is exacerbating this issue with unemployment is the fourth industrial revolution. Now, this isn't something that's going to happen sometime in the future. This is something that's happening now, right? Oftentimes people ask if I'm a futurist, and I have to tell them that I'm not a futurist, I'm a presentist, because this has been happening in front of us for the past 3, 4, 5 years, where if you've been to a McDonald's or any of these fast food organizations, they're replacing their frontline employees with kiosks. Many of the retail institutions are going out of business. They're being replaced by online commerce, Amazon and others that are sucking up massive amounts of commerce and destroying Main Street. We already have quite a few self-driving trucks. So the 3.2 million truck drivers in the United States are in the process of being replaced by self-driving trucks. Not only is it less expensive, but it's significantly safer. There's fewer accidents and just healthier for the entire population. And we're seeing anybody who does work that requires repetitive manual labor, and eventually anybody that requires repetitive cognitive labor will be replaced. So down the road, we're talking about even accountants, lawyers, radiologists, and other types of doctors, people who believed that because of their level of education and the cognitive nature of their work that they would be safe, are also in the process of being replaced by robots. Now, that in conjunction with the fact that we're in the middle of a global pandemic that might last years with multiple waves, can cause very large issues. Now, what this also means is there's a significantly a higher incentive for corporations to speed up the rate at which they replace their workers with robots, because robots don't have to worry about coming into work. They don't have to worry about getting sick. They don't have to worry about only putting in 8 hours or getting distracted by Facebook while they're working from home or getting distracted by their children. They are much more consistent at work. And so corporations are making these calculations as we speak to determine how much of their workforce they can replace with robots so they can get back to profitability as soon as possible. This is just the timeline for the fourth industrial revolution is becoming much more constrained. It's happening faster. So that's the second big thing that we're seeing right now. The third is the normalization of work from home and the challenges associated with that. So as we know, those of us who are lucky enough to have knowledge jobs are able to work from home. The problem with that is many corporations doubt how much their employees are actually working, because what people are finding is that many of the employees will turn on their work computers, will log in, but then watch Tiger King in the background on their television or play video games or hang out with their cat rather than actually getting work done. And what's happening across the board is a massive drop in productivity on a per person basis. And you're seeing that across tech companies, across companies in other sectors. We're having we're having a number of corporations reach out to us and say, hey, you use this technology to collect biometric data on people so you can teach them more effectively. Can we use the same technology instead to look at what our employees are actually doing while they're supposed to be working at home? Are they actually looking at their screen? Are they watching a movie? Are they, playing with their dog or doing their laundry for their kids? Or are they actually getting work done? And so there's a lot of questions around that, especially if this lasts for a year with additional waves coming through, especially if there's mutations and different pandemics that hit us, which some people believe might happen. And so how do we actually solve for that? And again, artificial intelligence can solve for it. So continuing with some of the other problems, government oversight. We're already talking about how governments are going to be using various forms of contact tracing, various forms of crowd control, as well as tracking and testing to see what the population is doing. So at what point do we become a global fascist government that's looking at every single thing that we're doing, who we're interacting with, who we're meeting with, where we're going, versus having freedom? And again, AI can solve for this. And finally, data collection and security. With all of this data that we're collecting on people, how is this actually being secured? Who is using it? And are governments using it for propaganda? So these are the problems that we see, the trends that are happening. So then the question is, how do we actually solve for these problems? I'm sorry? I heard somebody asking a question. Or maybe it was just the microphone being on. So the question is, how do we solve for these problems? Well, so the first three problems can be solved with artificial intelligence if we have the data security side taken care of, if we if whoever that is could turn their microphone off, that would be awesome. Thank you. But so the question then is, if we can secure the information, if we can get society to agree and get corporations to agree, and the people are collecting the data on us to agree that this data actually belongs to the people themselves, that it belongs to the consumer rather than the corporation that's collecting this data on us, then we can actually use artificial intelligence to collect information on people to enable massive levels of personalization that enables people to actually learn significantly faster, that enables people to understand what they're doing and be able to protect themselves from the distraction that comes from Facebook and Reddit and Instagram and all the other things that we see. But then the question is, how do we actually protect it? And so I'm a huge fan of what Brittany's doing with the Own Your Data movement. Brittany Kaiser, who is the primary whistleblower for Cambridge Analytica. My other friend, Jim Clark, runs the International Congress for the governance of artificial intelligence and data. He's working with the United Nations to build conversations around that. And I know we made an announcement at the World Economic Forum in Davos this last January that we, for all of the data that we collect on people, 10,000 data points every second on every individual, that we are giving them 100% agency over what is that data is used for and which of their data we're allowed to sell, if any, and it's all opt-in. And we also made an announcement that if we ever do sell any of their data, they would be entitled not only to the agency over their data, but they would be entitled to over 50% of the revenue that's generated from the sale of their data. And we're calling on other companies and other organizations to do the same thing, to lead a movement of corporations and governments that that do this at first voluntarily and that demand that other organizations do the same. And I think part of it comes from consumers and business leaders and technologists to demand that the corporations with whom they do business do the same thing and take the responsible role with data. Because if we don't, we are going to see many other problems coming down the line. So I'm going to pause here. We have 10 minutes left. I'd love to open it up for a conversation if you guys have opinions on what's happening, or if you have questions, or any way you want to forward the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that was very long, but what you got to at the end was very good. The ownership of the data stuff, like I think that's a super worthwhile thing to do. Like ownership of the data and having people being able to use it for their own purposes, or being able to, you know, further society by providing it to other people. That was that at the end of it, that was really good. It was a very long way. It was a long route to get there, though.
Well, thank you. I was trying to share a lot of information. I know we have 30 minutes for the call, so I wanted to provide plenty of context and information for the listeners. But I do agree with you. Thank you for the kind words. I think that is a move that we need. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on ways that we can pressure organizations, governments, and corporations to take on this mantle of responsibility with the way that they interact with our data?
I have another question
Oh, go for it.
regarding your claim that the productivity is going, which I totally believe, because if people are working from home, then there's lower productivity. Is it measurable? So do you have some data? Is there some statistics already? This is very interesting to know. And to if there is some already, maybe it's too preliminary, too early. But I would be very interested to know how much productivity goes down, maybe depending on the kind of the sector or kind of people and all these things. Do you know if there's something, or is it just a subjective opinion of somebody you have heard?
So the data I'm getting from that are from corporations that have done internal tracking and internal analysis on their own employees. And so I've had conversations with over 36 Fortune 500 companies that have come to us and asked us to use our technology to enable their employees to be more effective. And the numbers that I've gotten from them, and I haven't had any way to validate these numbers, but the numbers that I've gotten from them is anywhere from 30 to 70% drop in a per person productivity as they've measured it in the past. So for salespeople, obviously measuring against sales; for coders and developers, measuring based on the number of lines of code and the number of projects, the number of feature sets that they are able to deliver. And for various other employees, they have their own KPIs that they measure. And so they're able to measure the actual productivity on a per person basis for their own institutions and organizations. And so, again, I haven't validated any of this, but these I've heard from a significant number of corporations that are very concerned about this.
So 30 to 70%, let's say if it's 50%, is somebody works effectively only 4 hours instead of 8.
Basically, yeah.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason, I mean, I think it's pretty logical, right? Because they don't necessarily have their boss sitting over their shoulder. They have an inbuilt excuse about why they're less productive because of this massive pandemic. They are sitting there with their families, with their kids struggling or interrupting them constantly. And keep in mind as well that there are so many studies that show that every time you get interrupted, it's not just a time loss, but it takes your brain anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes to recalibrate.
To synchronize again. Yeah, of course, because we cannot multitask. We cannot multitask.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the context switching costs are extremely high. And so if you're a dad or a mom sitting at home working, every time your kid runs in and wants your attention, that's the context switching cost of that. It's an amount of time that you lose each time you're distracted. And so in addition to all of the distractions we typically face when we're on our computer, from Facebook notifications and other social media and email constantly pinging us, there are these additional distractions. And of course, while people are sitting at home, their coworkers aren't sitting next to them, their boss isn't in the room with them. And so if they pop open Facebook or pop over Netflix, they think nobody's watching, so it doesn't matter. but they don't look at the long term. They don't see themselves losing that productivity, but their managers do. Their managers' managers do as well.
I guess
Uh,
like this was something that I kind of like picked up on the earlier in the talk. Like was like you talk about learning and improving productivity, but like, do you see learning as inherently only to improve productivity, or like what is your goals in like you say you want to improve learning in people, you want to improve people's knowledge and so on. Is it just to improve productivity in terms of the workplace, or is there like what is your goals in like what are you trying to achieve in like, is it just to make
Sure.
better workers, or is it just to or is learning itself the goal?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. My initial goal, my long-term goal, the reason I'm doing all of this is because right now, the global population, we have 6% of the global population has a college degree, which means that we're squandering 94% of the intellectual capital of the human race. So I began when I founded this company by asking, what happens if we 10x that number? What happens if we 10x the number of engineers and scientists and researchers and developers and programmers and business people? Would we be able to more effectively solve all these massive problems and challenges that we face as a globe, including ocean acidification, catastrophic climate change, biodiversity loss, and a number of other things I'm not going to go into right now. Now, the short-term goal is because we have to be profitable. We're a tech company. We have to have a market that we're going after immediately. And so what I recognized is that as a part of the Industrial Revolution, the fourth Industrial Revolution, there are a significant number of people, about 49 million people in the United States, and about 1.2 billion people globally that are going to lose their jobs to robots over the next 5 to 10 years. And so the question then is, how do we solve that problem? How do we take that group of people and reskill them for other jobs quickly? Now, with that particular part of the goal, yes, the goal is to
Right, but
improve productivity,
why
enable those
reskill
people
them
to
for their
learn.
jobs? Like why reskill them for their jobs? Is that like is that a primary goal? Like, you know, is that what your goal is? Just that everyone has a job and everyone, you know,
Yeah, absolutely. I
what,
mean, I would love to be in a world where we have universal basic income. Andrew Yang is a very dear friend of mine. I would love to see that happen, but realistically, I don't think that's going to happen that quickly. And so in the meantime, I know what it's like to live in poverty. I know what it's like to be a refugee and not have access to work or to resources. And so the fastest way to enable people to pull themselves out of poverty is to enable them to upskill and do jobs for which they will be paid a significant amount of money.
right? But no, I mean, like I get that argument completely, but it just you were talking about like sort of enhancing human knowledge, right? Enhancing learning capabilities.
Yeah.
But like if that enhancing learning capabilities is geared towards the goal of getting a job, then I'm not so sure about it, because then like you're enhancing human capabilities to work for somebody.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. That's a very valid concern and a very valid um, thing to bring up for sure. I think there's different parts to that. I think in the short term, we can enable people to get jobs. And at the end of the day, unless someone's going to be an entrepreneur and start their own company, they do need to work for somebody else. But in the long term, I want to train more engineers and doctors and researchers so that we can actually face all of the SDGs and solve for them. But I think SDG number 4, education, is fundamental to solving for all the other sustainable development goals that we're facing as a world.
You said
I will. I
84%
think
don't finish the mocks. Is there any idea? Do you have any idea how to make them to lower this number?
yes. So that's exactly what my company does. So what we do is we figure out how to hyper personalize content to the individual, rather than a one size fits all approach that MOOCs use. So what we have figured out is when we collect over 10,000 biometric data points per second per user from their camera, their microphone, their wearables, as well as what websites they visit, we're able to identify at 6 a.m. versus 6 p.m. Do we show a video? Do we do experiential learning? Do we show a text-based learning? And even within videos, do I have a 65-year-old guy with a British accent explain this material, or do I have a 30-year-old Indian female explain this video for that individual in real time with hundreds and hundreds of permutations in every way? Now, I do have to apologize. I have another call that I have to get on. So it is 3 o'clock and I was given 30 minutes. So I'm gonna hop off and join this other call. But it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you guys. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.